Welcome all. I'm joined today by Manoogian, a member of the Michigan House of Representatives.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming down, Mari. So, as I understand, this is your first time in Armenia. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little more about your visit, what was the purpose of your visit, and what the experience has been like so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm engaged with many different groups in the Armenian diaspora, and the Armenian Assembly of America is here for a short visit. And the folks there asked if, I asked them, hey, can I tag along? I'd love to, learn a little bit more about how you do engagement with the Armenian government. And so that's how I ended up in Armenia for a few days.
Nice. And I mean, were there any organizations that you got to see, any aspects of the political sphere in Armenia that you got to observe? I mean, what was your interactions like? What different groups did you meet during this visit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, since this is my first visit to Armenia, and I don't have a lot of connection to the Armenian political system itself and understanding, so this has been my first real exposure to it. So I've been able to meet with both the folks who are in the ruling party, folks who are in opposition. I've met with the ICRC to better understand what we're doing with regard to POWs, what the international community is doing with regard to POWs. So I've really tried to make sure that my visit has been very well-rounded.
And do you find that the Armenian community back in Michigan is following the developments in Armenia? They're interested and want to know more about things like the POWs issue, the conflict with Azerbaijan, and other major developments that are taking place in Armenia?
Definitely. The diaspora is incredibly engaged right now. I think there was some concern that following the United States' recognition of the Armenian genocide by the president, but also by the United States House and the United States Senate, that there may be a bit of a disengagement by the part of the diaspora. But because of the dire situation in Armenia and Artsakh right now, the folks in Michigan and indeed in the rest of the United States in the diaspora are very engaged and are very attuned to what is happening here.
Okay, and you represent the 40th district in Michigan, and as I understand, the 40th district has been controlled by the GOP since the 1960s.
Yes.
By the Republican Party, and you flipped the seat, you and your team and your colleagues, of course, which is a remarkable achievement. I'm wondering what you think resonated with voters and how you think that people who typically voted Republican were swayed. What were the tactics, what were the narratives which were used, which in the end were rather successful?
Yeah, I mean, when I ran for office, it was 2018. President Trump had been in office for 2 years, and frankly, people were sick of that style of governing. So starting from that space, people were looking for somebody who was fresh, someone with new ideas, and I had never run for office before. And so folks were really excited about that opportunity to elect somebody who had those new ideas to bring to the table. When I ran, I focused a lot on, honestly, kitchen table issues that I've heard that resonate not just with my voters or not just with Americans, but those are the things that I hear in cafes when I've visited, various parts of the city of Yerevan. People are worried about, how they're going to put food on the table. They're worried about how they're going to be able to afford medicine and afford to see the doctor, what their schools are like, what the future of the economy is like. And so those were some of the large conversations that we had with voters at our doorsteps in the 40th district. And when I ran for office, we did really pursue a grassroots campaign. There was a lot of, I raised enough money to be able to run a viable campaign, which is, something that's, very important in American politics, unfortunately. You have to raise enough money to run a mail program, run a digital program, those kinds of things to be able to talk to your voters. And with, in my district, we have higher than 70% voter turnout. And so with great voter turnout, it's a great thing, but it becomes more expensive because you have more people you need to talk to for sure that are going to turn out and vote. And so in addition to all of those things, making sure we had the tangible items, we knocked on more than 80,000 doors across my district. I knocked 10,000 of them myself. And so that was very important to me to have those conversations. So that way when I went to work every day, I could really say that I understood what the people wanted because I've had those conversations with them.
And the word polarization comes to mind. Many believe that in the United States even there was a state of polarization, which many believe still exists. And during the Trump presidency, we really saw two rival camps develop. Armenia is much in the same situation. Many people say that since the 2020 Karabakh war, there is really a state of polarization. But how does one reach across the aisle and make their voice or their case heard in a civil and in a constructive way to people that may not usually agree with them, but that are now seen as almost in an enemy camp? So I'm wondering, as someone who convinced many people who voted for decades for a rival party to vote for a different party, how would you say one can break that convention of polarization?
It's not easy. And I serve in the minority right now in the Michigan House. I'm a Democrat, and Democrats control. We're 3 seats shy of being in the majority in the Michigan House. And so it's a very tight partisan divide. There's not very much room for wiggle room when it comes to taking votes. And so for me, part of building that trust is having conversations that are frankly very low stakes, talking about things that shouldn't be super partisan. I will say that I was reelected in 2020, and it's definitely worse now in American politics than it was in 2018. The kind of dangerous rhetoric, in my opinion, that's coming out of the GOP at every level of government, specifically with regard to upholding our values as a democracy and upholding fairness and having free and fair elections, has become a particular challenge as I look ahead to the elections in 2022. But I would say that continuing to have fruitful dialogue, just like when I would knock on doors throughout my district and have those real conversations with people and just like ask real people what they thought about the state of the world, what they wanted to see from their government. That's the place that we have to start. And
back to a bit of the Armenia aspect. Michigan is home to one of the most interesting and oldest Armenian communities in the United States. Can you tell us a bit more about your own Armenian story, your own Armenian roots, and what instilled Armenianness in you, and a desire to advocate for Armenian issues?
Sure. So when folks ask me like what my political journey was, even as just an American politician, although it's hard to separate my Armenian identity from my identity at all, I always talk about a couple of different things. One, I grew up in a family where my dad was very involved in the organized labor movement. And so through the kitchen table conversations we had as kids, I learned a lot about how to organize and how to collaborate and bring people together. Also, in addition to that, I think that a big reason why I was politically and civically minded as a kid comes from my parents' emphasis on ensuring that my younger sister and I were involved in the Armenian community, whether it was attending Sunday school, attending ARS one-day language school on Mondays after going to American school, or being involved in AYF, ACYOA. To me, it didn't matter what church an organization was affiliated with. If it involved hanging out with my friends, that's what I was going to do. So I've done all of those things. And I think for me, it is a no-brainer to introduce resolutions that are supportive of the Armenian homeland, in support of the Armenian people, whether it's a genocide recognition resolution, whether it's working on resolutions related to Artsakh or the sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia. Those things to me are very important as one of the only Armenian Americans elected at the state level.
And you also introduced a resolution, which you kind of mentioned, condemning Azerbaijan's attacks on Armenia and calling for an end to military aid to Azerbaijan. Can you tell us a bit more about this resolution and what sort of reception it's gotten?
Yeah, it was important to me, especially on the heels of Speaker Pelosi's visit, to make sure that there was a concrete piece of legislation that the Michigan legislature could consider to support that effort, but also support the efforts of Representative Spear and Pallone and others who have really taken the lead at the federal level. I think what folks have a hard time with understanding, and I totally get it because most people don't think about their state government every single day. Folks often think that I have more leverage or capabilities when it comes to foreign policy because I'm outspoken and because I'm Armenian American. And unfortunately, although I did study foreign relations in school and I've worked at the United States Department of State before, I am very limited in my capacity as a state legislator. So much of what I can do, I liken it to a United Nations resolution. I can call on people to do things, other people to do things. I'll be honest with you, we have seen the legislation reported on in the press, which is very good, but we are unfortunately in recess, which is why I was able to make this trip. So it likely will not get considered until after the 2022 elections coming up in November.
Right. And during your time in Armenia, you had the opportunity to meet with people from the Armenian Assembly of America, the opposition, Queer's organization, but also regular people on the street. I'm wondering, when you go back to the States, what message will you take about the desires, what Armenian people are telling you here?
First and foremost, I think it's fairly obvious that the Armenian people want to live in peace. The republic, the Third Republic of Armenia has existed, for a little bit longer than I've been alive, but not much. And so what seems so clearly obvious to me is that the Armenian people obviously deserve the right to self-determination and to see the government fulfill their will, but also deserve to see a future for themselves here, and one that is determined by what they wish for the rest of what they wish for their country. So that includes, continued economic development and engagement, making sure that the diaspora has a keen eye to making those connections happen to better the future of the Republic for the next 30 years and beyond.
Well, Mari Manoogian, we wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.